Go ahead.
We are going to have the parents introduce themselves first and give you a little bit of a background story to their NICU stay. And then we'll move into some questions kind of surrounding those primary drivers for Define. Take it away.
Hi, I'm Tara, and this is Brandon. We had our daughter at 24 weeks. She was 1 pound, 9 ounces. We spent 152 days in the NICU. The first 8 weeks were very touch and go. We discussed her mortality 3 times, which no parent should have to do. And I think, sorry, I wasn't super prepared to tell my story and how to break it down because it's long, but it was very difficult, I think, to navigate the NICU because we weren't prepared for being in the NICU. I remember our first day of rounds, and there was literally 20 doctors, and that was extremely overwhelming. And they're speaking doctor language. So, of course, by day 152, I knew what they were saying, but day 1, we had no idea. Yeah, so I stayed close to the hospital for 5 weeks. We did not qualify for Ronald McDonald, which was frustrating. We lived an hour away, so that was really hard. So I had a friend graciously pay for a hotel so I could stay close by, which I think is super important, especially as a mom. Having to leave your child was very difficult. Yeah, so it was a very long, hard process, but we're good now. We left at 152 days on oxygen. She was on oxygen for 2 years. She came off. We've gone back on a couple times recently, just 2 weeks ago due to an illness, but that's just part of life. But she's thriving. She's in preschool. She's smart and sassy, and she's just great. So I'll let you talk too if you want to say some things.
I think the NICU experience was definitely different between the mother and the father. I know that for both of us, it was important for one of us to be there as much as we could. So Tara was pretty much there throughout the stay. It is difficult for both of us to be there. One of us, I did have to go back to work. So, and I think the most difficult part was I was fortunate enough to have leave, but it was limited. So as sick as she was, I only got 4 weeks of leave. After 3 weeks, I had to debate whether I should stay. Is she going to make it? Or do I go back to work and save that week for when she comes home? And so I think that is the toughest part. And your journey as a parent is different regardless. But from my perspective, it was difficult because it was hard enough for Tara to deal with not being able to bring her kid home, and to kind of have to be strong enough for kind of both of you at times was the hardest part. And so I think in my experience, it being 3 years removed, I think that the mental health aspect of it is probably the hardest part to get over. And I don't think we ever do, because I know when I had seen the pictures of Saul, I was just hit by 152 days at once. And it just, and the bad days were bad. And I think that when they tell you those first couple days in the NICU, it's a roller coaster ride. They're not lying. And you don't really realize that until you get to that lowest part. And so that NICU stay definitely changed us as parents and as people. And, there are days where I'm surprised I haven't teared up yet. There are days where it's easy to talk about our stay because you're excited about it. But then there are days when I talk about it and I can't get it out because you can't understand me between so I think that's the biggest hurdle, I think, is the mental aspect of going home. So I know that that's something that we deal with every day, and we probably will for the rest of our life. But as she said, we've got a 3-year-old that, looking at her, you wouldn't know she was a preemie. So, and I think the fight that she had to do to survive, which I think that's what makes NICU babies so unique, is that they had to fight so hard to do something that we all take for granted. And so I think it changes, or it makes them different people. And I think it makes them stronger people. And we see that every day.
Okay. I have notes, even it says say my name. So hopefully I get this straight. Okay, so I'm Ladina Ramirez. We're a military family from Wyoming. My water broke at 31 weeks, and in the middle of the night, I actually didn't even realize that's what happened and went back to sleep. Went to the doctor in the morning. I was flown flight for life from Wyoming to Denver. And she was born, my daughter was born 2 days later via emergency C-section. We were in the NICU for 42 days, and I'm glad nobody ever talks about the mental health part of it. Like, it changes. I would be surprised if it didn't, like, if there was somebody who went through it, that it didn't change them for life. But yeah, that's definitely a huge piece that is not addressed. I was not fine for 3 years until I had some doctors. They kept saying I had PTSD. I'm like, I have not been to war. I have not been shot. Like, you don't know what you're talking about. Multiple doctors and counselors, until they finally did an evaluation, because I just didn't believe any of them. So yeah, diagnosed with PTSD, anxiety, and that's still stuff that I struggle with today. So yeah, I'm glad that you guys said that. Yeah. I mean, I can hear the alarms from the machines from Brady's and stuff. And when I would hear a helicopter, my heart would just start pounding. That was the first time I'd been on a helicopter, was Flight for Life. I'd never planned to be on one again. A little bit of my medical background, which probably led to all of this. I was 36, so and they call it geriatric, but that's annoying. So I was 36. I had a fibroid in my uterus, and the doctor told me I had 3 months to get pregnant. I hadn't had any babies before. I had 3 months to get pregnant, or I would never be able to have a baby ever. So thankfully I was able to get pregnant, and that fibroid grew from, it was golf ball size. And by the time she was born, it was bigger than her. They said it was like I was carrying twins. So when they removed it, I had a partial hysterectomy after she was born. It was from bone to bone, like hip to hip. It was larger than she was. At 20 weeks, I was hospitalized. I had 5 days of contractions, and they contribute that to the fibroid that was growing so quickly. So I think I got everything. Anyways, so that was in 2014. She's 8 years old now, just went in 2nd grade, and she's doing great.
All right. Hi, my name is Heidi. We are here today because at 20 weeks at my ultrasound, they found amniotic band syndrome at my daughter around her belly, which is like super uncommon. And we were living in Iowa at the time, and they just kind of said, let's just keep an eye on it. We went back 2 weeks later, and basically like the band had been constricting a lot more. If you don't know this syndrome, like the bands will just keep constricting, and usually they'll cause like amputations, but with hers being around the belly, it was just really concerning. We had like the talk of, you may want to consider abortion, which we didn't want to do. So we got a second opinion here in Colorado. And then we had like a full day of testing just to kind of do MRIs and ultrasounds and all that stuff. And they basically said we could do like a intrauterine surgery, but that can cause premature birth. We were at like 22 weeks when this was going on. So like obviously the odds with that aren't great. So we decided to just kind of keep an eye on it and do monitoring at the fetal care center. It was doing okay, but then like my amniotic fluid got low around like 25-ish weeks. So they admitted me to the hospital, and then it just kind of kept progressing. I had to be on the fetal monitor like more and more until it was like all day, and I was in bed. It was absolutely terrible. I hate being static. So yeah, so that was an interesting time just in itself. Basically, she kept rolling on her umbilical cord, so they had to take her out with emergency C-section at 26 weeks. She was super small. She was 1 pound 3 ounces when she was born. And like they touched on, it was absolutely terrible. We also had she had neck twice. So that was a really frightening time, especially when she had it when she was only like 5 days old, super small. So like if she had to have surgery, like the odds of her surviving weren't super high. But despite that, she did pretty well. We were at the Ronald McDonald House, 11 hours from home during COVID. So we had no one in the NICU besides my husband and I. Thankfully, both of our jobs were great. We were able to both be here for the most of the time. She did come home on a G-tube due to aspirating, so we still have that going on. But besides that, she's doing great, like developmentally, and she's like the happiest kid ever. So we're super grateful. November.
Thank you. Bring it over here.
Hi, my name is Nelia Miller. I'm a nurse practitioner, and I'll try not to talk too long, but I froze my eggs at 36, didn't find a man. And so finally I went back and started to do some IVF, IUI at 38-ish. Did 2 IVF, didn't work, did my frozen eggs at, and then that didn't work. And then I did 4 more IVF. I was gonna go to donor eggs, and basically the doctor told me to give up and go to donor. And I said, okay, I'm gonna do 1 more round. And then it worked out really well. So I did 1 more, and I also had a fibroid, and the doctor, I also flew to New York like 7, 8 times in a pandemic to do the IVF because it's not affordable here. And then the doctor here told me, well, it could be the fibroid, possibly, maybe that's why you can't get pregnant. So he said I should get that removed, but I only had 1 fibroid. And so he said, well, you put your best embryos in. So I said, well, that doesn't make sense. If you're saying I'm not going to get pregnant, why would I waste my best embryos? So she is my worst embryos at age 41. If you have any knowledge, she's either a 2CB or a 2BC, not tested. And she was my 13th and 14th embryo. I had a really rough pregnancy. Pretty much everything that could go wrong went wrong. I got admitted at 25 weeks, and well, I came in and I was gonna go to the gym and go swimming and lift weights, and then they were like, yeah, you need to come in. And I was like, wait, what? And he's like, yeah, your cord blood flow is not working right. They already told me from the beginning my placenta was not good, and all the tests were coming back positive. And so I went and got my stuff, and she's IVF with sperm donor, and I'm single. So I came into the hospital. while I was there, tried to keep a pretty positive attitude. But that being said, like, they had the NICU attending come in, and, you know, I told them I was 25 weeks, and I told them, and she had IUGR, so she's small. And I said, you know what? I said, because they were like, here, sign this paper so we can cut you open. And I was like, wait, what's going on? And I said, well, you know, if she looks bad, if she looks sick, you know, I don't know if it's sometimes can be harder when you're in the medical field. Cause I was like, do not resuscitate her. Like, I know things could be bad. Like I regardless that I'm single or not, like I want a kid who has a quality of life, and that's not, and he's like, well, even at 25 weeks, I think we would all resuscitate her. And I said, yes, but you know, if she looks sick or not sick. And I was like, if she looks sick, do not resuscitate her. So, you know, and that's a hard decision to make. And I think most normal non-medical people say, do everything. But if you're in the medical field, you kind of have a little bit different perspective on long-term, especially I worked in ER, pediatric nurse, and all that kind of stuff. So anyways, got admitted, COVID, you know, then I, just everything happened. I had placenta abruption, and then they kept saying, well, then they were going to send me home. And then they were like, well, you're old and you have everything wrong with you, so you can decide if you want to stay here. And I was like, well, I live alone. So, and then they were like, well, you can check movements. Well, I didn't feel her. She had a placenta, anterior placenta. So anyways, I ended up having to have a C-section. I was on magnesium. I don't remember a lot of stuff. It was pretty bad. And what was really not good, just from the birth experience in the NICU, is like a friend found me. I don't even know how she got there. She was in the recovery room with me. And like, I didn't even get to see my baby for 30 hours. And it really still hurts me that nobody was with her for like 30 plus hours. And because of COVID, like, I don't have any pictures of her birth. And that still kind of bothers me.
Press it again.
They said if my friend went and saw her, then I couldn't have anybody else visit, because you can only have one person and you can't exchange them the whole time, and she's going to be there a long time. So I kind of wish I would have just had my friend go, so I would have had that. But anyways, hindsight. She was born 11/24/21. So she's my Thanksgiving baby. Her birthday's on Thanksgiving this year, and we were there 94 days. I spent every holiday in the NICU. I was there 10 to 12 hours a day. That's another thing. Nobody said Happy Thanksgiving to me, and I was a little bit irritated, because I was like, nobody even told me it was Thanksgiving, and I was all drugged up, and I was like, that's rude. So, yeah, so that's pretty much my story. We came out, she was due 2/13. We came out end of February. And the main thing that was a barrier was just COVID and not being able to, like, if you're single and you don't have a spouse, like, but even for those people, it's like, you can't have anybody else. I don't know. It doesn't quite make logical sense to me that you can't have a different person at least one time in 150 days, you know. Are they really going to come in and bring an illness in? Like, the parents aren't going to let them do that. Okay. So.
You.
Hi, sorry. I'm Katie McCabe. My husband Nick was supposed to be here today, but he is home with Elliot, who is not feeling well. So our baby was born at 29 weeks. We had only lived in Colorado for 6 months. We moved here for my job. I'm a faculty member at UCCS. At about 25 weeks, we knew something fishy was going on. He was measuring really small, so we got a diagnosis of IUGR at that point. We kept going to be monitored. We got the clear to go home for a week for the holidays, back to upstate New York, where our families are from. We got off the plane on a Sunday. We live in the Springs, so we drove back down to the Springs came back up here for our appointment and were sent to the hospital. And I think the whole time we were very optimistic I could keep this baby cooking a lot longer, which is ironic because I love to cook and bake. So I often say Elliot is the best thing I ever baked, even though he was a little underdone. But we were very, very optimistic that nothing, that Elliot needed to be monitored. We got steroid shots. And then my health took a turn about 4 days into our hospital stay. When I also say we were optimistic, I also put in like a Target order of things for our room that never got picked up. So, it was very unexpected. He was born at 29 weeks due to HELLP syndrome. I had a lot of wonderful advocates for me on my end. My nurse, my platelet levels were like right on the borderline when I might have had to go full anesthesia. And she really advocated for me that I could be awake. And I'm forever grateful for that. We had a 100-day NICU stay. Elliot will probably be a numbers guy like his dad, because he wanted that 100-day even stay. We were able to transfer down to a hospital closer to home when Elliot was 37 weeks gestational age. Elliot will be 9 months old soon, and he's doing great. He loves food. That's his new favorite thing, and people. And it's been, we were very isolated here in Colorado. We did not have a community established. And so it's been really wonderful to see how he's thriving out of the NICU, and being able to just share him with people, I think has been one of our greatest things. So, yeah.
Thank you. Jason, finish us off with these intros.
Good afternoon, everyone online as well. Thank you guys for hosting us today. My name's Jason Foisey. My wife is watching via the web link here, so hopefully I'm going to do her well here. Our NICU stay started on December 26th. She went in on December 24th for the urine test to see if there was proteins in there. And the doctors are like, yep, okay, yep, just, we'll call you day after Christmas. Don't worry about it unless it comes back too bad, then we'll call you tomorrow. Got a call 9 a.m.-ish on day after Christmas. You should go to the hospital. They're expecting you in the ER. They're going to check you in. She had the flu. She had preeclampsia. She was on quarantine in the hospital prior to COVID. So 9 years ago, quarantine, nobody wanted to come into the room anyways. Kids were born on December 30th at 30 weeks, 0 days. Well, 10 weeks early. Jacob and Madison are two little angels. Jacob was in the NICU for 60 days. Madison was in the NICU for 67 days. The struggles and what hurt the initial part of the NICU stay was my wife laying in bed on magnesium. She was bartering with doctors to keep them cooking. She did not think the timer was done. She loves underbaked cookies, but these things need to be baked longer. And trying to explain that NICU environment, trying to explain hey, they're setting up 2 isolates. They're going to be next to each other. We're not across the hall from each other. This is where they're going to be. These are the monitors for each of them. This is some of the nursing staff. Well, what about, and then she would come back with other questions. Well, are the isolates heated? Do we just have to look at them through there? Do they have the little rubber gloves like Star Trek that you put your hands in and that's the only way I'm allowed to touch them? When can I go see them after they're born? Okay, hold on. Let me go and ask those questions. I'll be right back. Asking the nurses, can I just FaceTime with her? And again, 9 years ago, a lot of concerns around HIPAA and there's other little ones over there. You might catch them. Somebody might see them. Like, I just want to show her pictures. That's all we need. All right, well, whatever. Go back, explain some more. The other barrier that we ran into was me. Being a guy in the NICU, being a father in the NICU, the expectations, as Brandon put it, it's the, oh, how's mom doing? How's mom doing? Okay, when are the kids going to be born? When are the kids coming home? Nails on the chalkboard. Never want to hear that again. I don't care if they're coming home for Christmas when they're 40. I don't know until they walk through the door. It's the societal expectations, and it has gotten better on being a guy, being the male, being the partner in the relationship of, we can keep piling on you because you will keep it together and you will not break. You are that rock. You will go to work. You will go get dinner. You will take care of the dogs. You will take care of the house, do the grocery shopping, take care of her, take care of the kids. And you're going to do it all with a smile because that's what's expected. The kids are 8. They're happy. They're climbing mountains.
Thank you all so much for sharing your story. We will, let's get to know each other.
Did that. So we already went over, thank you, Susan, all of the key drivers. What we did was create questions as a group, a committee, that we wanted to ask the parents related to each of the key drivers for Define. And in those key drivers, as you guys have heard, conversations around communication and interaction. So we let this amazing families check into, which ones do you want to answer? What's the thing that feels the most important to you that gets said in this room? And so we're going to start with this question, which is, describe the interactions between you and the hospital staff and how those communications made you. Which there was a slide earlier about joy. Here's the things we want families to feel. Here's what actually it feels like. We won't swear, hopefully. You have numbers.
I do. And
She's pointing at me.
we communicated.
So I had 2 main points to talk about on the communication between the hospital staff and me. One is a trust issue. And then the next one is how the daily rounds went. So during my C-section, there was somebody, I don't even know, some hospital staff, I have no idea if it was a nurse or what, but was assigned to like my head, I think, to probably keep me calm. I really don't know. First time in a C-section room. But she was assigned to just hear, to talk to me. And when my baby was born, I didn't hear anything. And there was like just a ton of people in the room, probably, I don't know, a whole team for me, a whole team for her. And I couldn't hear anything. And I asked her if she was breathing, and she said yes. And she wasn't. And so I was done with like trust at that point. And I totally get, like, I could hear the doctor saying that I was losing a lot of blood. She probably didn't want me to die, have a complete meltdown right there while I'm still cut open and everything. So I understand why, but I think a better solution maybe would have been, because then trust was like, that's how I am in everything in life. Once somebody lies to me, I don't believe you anymore. So maybe like saying, I'll check, or there's a bunch of doctors with her right now, I'll let you know in a second, something like that. But and why I know she wasn't breathing is I didn't get to see her, touch her, hold her, nothing, couldn't even see her. And so I had my husband take my, I don't know why my cell phone was in there, but anyways, that's never dawned on me. Take my cell phone and get a picture of her. And she wasn't not breathing. She was all the way purple. So that was one issue, I guess. And then the daily rounds with I think somebody said there's like a whole entire team that comes in. How things were presented. Somebody who's, first of all, super traumatized, scared to death, hoping your baby lives, all those things, non-medical. The things that were how they were presented to me every day. It was, something's wrong with her blood, something's wrong with her brain. She has a cyst on her brain. I mean, just constant every day, something super terrifying. How it was presented was really traumatizing. So they say, like, for example, we don't know if she will ever be able to walk ever. And you're not going to know until she does. So when I said earlier, like, I was really not fine for like 3 years, that was a piece of it, still don't know if she's going to walk until she does, and they're behind. Some of the things, though, that were presented also were like the cyst on her brain. So they said she might have cerebral palsy, but we don't know. So she might never walk, and all the things that come with that. She might have cerebral palsy, or it might, and she doesn't, by the way, or it might be a water cyst that just kind of goes away. So it was presented like just, and I didn't know one single person who had had a preemie baby ever in my life before. So there was nobody to say, like, yeah, there's all these really scary things, but she might be totally fine. Like, we've heard all those things too, might be fine. They said, somebody came in and told me that she will have, and I like remember word for word here, chronic lung disease for life, and then bye, and then they left. And like, maybe you guys know, being medical staff, that could mean asthma, but I did not know that. It was, she's going to have chronic lung disease for life. That sounds terrifying. Like, had a complete meltdown. That sounds really, really bad. Like, can she breathe ever in her life? Is like, that sounds awful. And truly complete meltdown for like an entire day, till somebody in the hospital said, oh, that could just mean asthma, which she does have asthma. That would have been really good to know. That might have prevented like 12 anxiety attacks. So just how things are presented to people that don't know all the medical terms. So, yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing.
So, like I said, the hospital that Elliot was born at, we lived I think we just met the distance for Ronald McDonald House. So we did qualify to stay at Ronald McDonald House. Eventually we were able to transfer him back down closer to home. And there were a lot of good things about that, and a lot of like challenges for us. But when we transferred, we found out that the communication between the NICUs was very difficult to navigate. What was said, we just kind of assumed providers were going to talk to providers and it would be a smooth transfer. But we found out quickly that a lot of the information about Elliot's current status needed to be relayed through us. And that therefore we feel some things got miscommunicated about like what his current status and needs were, in particular feeding. He was transferred at 37 weeks. And so he wasn't taking full bottles yet. We had just started working on nipple feeds. So in retrospect, Nick and I needed to be a little needed to ask for more support and consistent care with feedings, which is something we didn't get at our second hospital. We were told the day we transferred that the nurse who was caring for Elliot on his intake would be his primary nurse at the new hospital. But she was a traveling nurse, so we only saw her 1 or 2 more times. A few weeks later, we realized this lack of consistency in the nursing assignments. And so we requested another primary nurse. We didn't see her for a couple of weeks. We knew we were going on vacation. And then I ran into her in the hallway and I was like, wait, why aren't you assigned to us today? And she had been getting assigned her shifts to other families who were also she was a primary nurse for them, but not for us. And so we felt like because Elliot didn't, at that point in time, he didn't have his chest tube or ventilator anymore. He was on low flow oxygen. He didn't have these sophisticated care requirements. So he was not sometimes not given those consistent care that may have facilitated an earlier discharge is what we think about a lot of times. Having a primary nurse who knew Elliot and knew us would have helped with the communication with the therapy team, who we probably needed the most at that point in time. We felt things were always communicated to us well. Like we understood why Elliot needed the things he did, and the medical staff clearly communicated rationales as to why we have to make these decisions in Elliot's care. I remember all the visuals and diagrams that were drawn out for us, but the feeding exactly telling me the numbers of how she calculated his volumes and things like that. But we felt we were unable to advocate for Elliot in major care decisions because we didn't have that technical knowledge and we couldn't communicate that to our care team. And so oftentimes we just felt that Elliot was being overlooked and sometimes maybe a low priority by the medical staff and therapy team. And maybe like a primary nurse ally could have helped us communicate our goals, wishes, and needs to that larger team.
Thank you so much for sharing.
Our second question is, did you know there were support services available to NICU families? Describe your experience addressing services in the hospital and in your community. For example, peer support, developmental support, financial support, and access to additional resources.
Start over here.
Yes, we did know there was support. Actually, the social worker at our hospital was amazing. They were very helpful with a lot of stuff because we were not prepared to be in the NICU when we were. It was I was on the antepartum side before I went to the NICU, and it was a very emergency situation. So we'd never toured the NICU, didn't know what we were doing. And so of course you get over there and then you're like, oh, what? So they were very helpful in helping us figuring out like Brandon's disability stuff for work, and they offered insurance. They were like, we'll call, we'll send the stuff, we'll do everything, which was so nice because you can't even think when you're going through that. So that was definitely very helpful. And we had Love for Lily as an option at our hospital too. And at the time, March of Dimes was there, which is unfortunately no longer a part of Colorado, which is super sad and unfortunate, because that was also a good resource for us to have. So I think there's definitely a need for something like that again. What that might be, I don't know, but that was definitely helpful. Some things that would have been, I think, more helpful, which somebody touched on, but like, I feel like, when you're a patient in the hospital, you get a meal, right? When your child's a patient in the NICU, they don't eat except. And so why does the mom or the dad not get a meal? Because they always talk about self-care and make sure you're taking care of yourself and doing all these things. And I would get one meal coupon a week. And I was at the hospital from 7 a.m. until 9 p.m. And I think it's very important that food should be, that we shouldn't be having to pay for food. Add it to my $3 million bill. Like work it in the cost. I don't care. There's got to be a spot for that. So I think that could be a very helpful service for people. And I know the Ronald McDonald House is an option for people, but you have to literally live like 60-mile plus away. But some of us don't live 60 miles away, but it was an hour drive. And I can't tell you how many mornings I was racing in rush hour traffic to try to get to the hospital so I didn't miss my care time, through the city of Denver. And it would have been nice to have an option like Ronald McDonald for people that aren't that far away. Maybe another type of housing situation or something. I mean, they did have some options at the hospital, but you could only book one night per 2 weeks. You had to do it so far in advance. There was only 2 rooms. The beds were terrible. The water sometimes worked. I mean, it just was not, we were not in a hospital that had private rooms. So we were in a pod. So we didn't have the option to stay with our baby in the room. And I think that should also be something that's in hospitals. All NICUs should have their own private room. So you can stay as an option, but we didn't get that option. So then it was like having to decide who's, we had other kids at home and pets and things like that to trying to navigate. But as a mom, I don't want to leave my kid. So after staying in a hospital for 5 weeks, or in the hotel and then having to go home, then that was really hard to navigate driving back and forth and figuring out our schedule and that. So it just, that would be a nice resource to have more options of places to stay closer to your kid.
And along with that, the first 8 weeks of Harper's life was, they were a lot more downs than ups. So there were a lot of the week 6 to week 8, pretty much every treatment she was getting was trying to get her to the next day. Everything they did was not to make her better, but was to keep her going so they could figure something out. So in those cases, we didn't have a place to stay. And, my first week of Harper being in the hospital, I went through an anxiety of, I didn't want to go in because I was scared to death of her not making it, or a doctor coming to us telling us, there's something wrong. And then when I would finally get over that fear, I didn't want to leave because I didn't want to get that phone call that Harper didn't make it or that something went wrong. So now we're, if we were able to stay, which at the time we didn't have a place, we were trying to stay as close as we could. We didn't have anywhere real close to stay. That would have been wonderful. But one of the things that I wish we'd had more of was somebody to talk to. We did have people with Love for Lily. Some of them were my therapists through a lot of those tough times, especially those 2 weeks that were pretty tough. There really isn't anybody to talk to except for your nurses. And so, to have somebody there to discuss these things, because as she said before, we talked about our daughter's mortality twice before she was born, because of the condition as to why she was going to be born early, one of which was the option that we could terminate should we desire, because she was going to be born early. She could have been born anywhere after week 20. So from week 20 to week 24, there was no hope for her. And she almost came at 23 weeks and 2 days. So the options that you have at the time, 3 years ago, we were told some pretty grim numbers. And so the thought process of that was, there's nothing wrong with her. So we want to give her every opportunity to make it. But at the same time, when you hear the numbers of her survival rate or her coming home with a disability and what that disability is going to be, at that night, we're sitting there thinking, are we monsters for trying to do everything we can for her? Are we being selfish? But at the same time, there's nothing wrong with her. So you fast forward to getting through each day to make it to the next day and pretty much having grim conversations that she's, you probably should stay close. We don't know what the next 24 hours are going to bring. There's nobody to talk to about that. There's nobody to prepare you for hearing stuff like that. And what ended up saving her life was a doctor came in and changed and did some things that are against NICU, which in a NICU, as you all know, it's very gradual, very small changes. The changes that saved our daughter's life were very extreme, were uncommon. And what we found out was there were 2 babies that went through that treatment. Only one of those survived. And so that's tough to hear, because our little one was the one to survive. So you have a little bit of survivor's remorse for that. And there really should be somebody for parents to talk to, have quick access to, because 152 days, that's a long time. Fortunately for us, it was only 6 to 8 weeks that was horrible. But after that, it got better. And so we had that it got better, but it still resonates. As I'm talking about it, I'm thinking about it as though it was yesterday. So I think that is the hardest part about NICU, that nobody can understand unless you're sitting here and you've been through it. It's the mental aspect, and I think that's the biggest thing that needs to change in the NICU, in my opinion.
Thank you so much. It takes a lot of courage to share your story, as you all can see, and we just appreciate you all so much for being here. Move on. 3, Sahra. Sorry.
What helped you feel that you could participate in your child's care? What helped you feel empowered?
So we despite being in COVID and not having like any family support near us, because we were 11 hours from home, we had a really good support system in the hospital with like the primary nurses and the attending like physicians. We had really good connections with them all. So I would say what helped you feel like you could participate in your child's care is just having those nurses like encouraging you, because it sounds terrible, but like I was so scared to just hold my baby, because the first time I held her, she had multiple Brady's over and over and over again. So you really like, you want to hold your child, but at the same time, you're like scared to death. It's like an anxiety portion for you. So just having like that support and encouragement from the nurses was so important for me and my husband. And then also just being able to participate in, normal parent tasks like changing their diaper. And then when they got to the point of being able to wear clothes, like having those nurses there and being like, Blake's having her first fashion show, and just making it really feel more like normal, even though it's not normal whatsoever, really helped us in that aspect to just feel like more like a normal mom in the most unnatural environment ever. And then like she kind of touched on, but having those primary nurses that you could talk to, now I'm actually like friends with some of my daughter's nurses, and just be able to like build a connection with them to just, have normal adult conversation with was so important for my husband and I, especially with COVID and everything. It was nice to just have talking with somebody else about normal life activities besides your child. So I think that was something that really helped us with our NICU stay.
We always felt really involved with Elliot's care. Like, I'm not a very timely person. So if we were running a few minutes late to the hospital, we could call and they would hold off cares for like 10 minutes, and which felt really nice in those mornings. People always made an effort to keep us in the loop. We were always so appreciative of how doctors and NPs and nurses would explain things to us. But what we didn't feel empowered about was making like big decisions in his care. We wish providers would have looked at our family individually and allowed us to like collaboratively make decisions with us that were best for us, not just because that was the way things were always done. And so even after requesting a care conference at our second NICU, we felt that there was never really a consistent plan to prepare Elliot for discharge. And him being in the NICU, I mean, that not really knowing going into the NICU and then knowing that the goal is his due date, and his due date passed. And I always called him our March Madness baby. And March Madness was going on and Elliot was still in the NICU. And I was like, man, I thought we were going to be home for the Final Four game. It just, it felt like we were just trying the same things over and over again too. And I think the inconsistency in his care, like not having a primary toward the end, often felt like a setback for us. We think, like I kind of said before, having a primary nurse would have helped us advocate for those things and helped us feel a little bit more empowered. And we know what that feeling is like of having a primary nurse to know him really well, because at our first hospital, we did have that. And our primary nurse spent so much time with Elliot. And when she wasn't there, we still had like a consistent rotation of people who we became familiar with. And when we had a primary nurse like this, it felt like our goals and milestones could be reached. Like it felt like we felt more empowered that those were attainable. For example, she was the one who suggested to teams during rounds that it was time to bump his oxygen down to like high flow or low flow. Or she was the one who was like, hey, we should try breastfeeding next time you come in. You know, it was, so her knowing Elliot made us feel more empowered, and encouraged us to make decisions that were best for us and Elliot and our family.
Thank you, Katie. Turn back over to you all here.
So positively, yes, we felt empowered to help take care of Harper's needs, doing her cares. Most of the nurses would let us actively, do pretty much what we could. Obviously, when she was first born and very sick, we were very limited on anything that we could do. Actually, I didn't even get to hold Harper for 2 weeks because of her grade 4 brain bleed and other things. So that was difficult at the beginning. But once she started getting healthier and we were able to then start doing more things. Unfortunately, she was on a ventilator for 75 days. So that makes it still very limited on what you can do. But once she came off the ventilator and then was on CPAP and then high flow, obviously it got way easier being able to dress. And I think that was super important. I remember I did remember one time, like I had a little laundry basket that had her name on it and I bring it in and I had all her clothes and like one, I didn't really know. And one time I had socks in there and one of the nurses was like, you might as well just take those home. She's never going to wear socks. And I was like, why do you even like, maybe just don't say anything. Just leave the socks in the basket. Let me have socks for my kid here. Like, who cares? Like, I just think stuff like that. Like, we're trying to make this as normal as possible. And there's nothing normal about bringing your hamper to the hospital for your kids' clothes. So, but most of the time we were able to definitely participate in the cares. And I think that was super important because we want to feel like we're normal parents doing the care. I kind of touch on like what Katie said. So, I mean, we were there for 152 days. Towards the end, I know Harper was still sick, but she's not really the sick baby anymore. So we had, developed really good relationships with doctors, nurses, tech staff. I mean, we knew everybody. And we had primaries, but at that point, they were putting our primaries with sicker babies. So then we were getting nurses that had never really worked with Harper, never been with her, never met us, don't know our schedules, who we are. And it actually became more stressful towards the end of our stay than it should have been, because I felt like I was like having to really fight for my child and explain things that I shouldn't have had to explain, or like a nurse gave her prune juice and she's not supposed to have it because it made her really sick one time. And it's just like stuff like that. I just got it was really frustrating. And I felt like we were getting overlooked because we weren't really the sick baby anymore. And I feel like if you're in the NICU, you're a sick baby. So it shouldn't matter if you're 152 days old or 4 days old. We should still be getting our primary nurse. Nurses, that's a reason why we pick them and why you have them. And they were getting moved to other floors to cover other staffing and doing all these other things. And it just was not, that was one of the most frustrating things, especially towards the end, because it's really important before you're getting ready to take your baby home and now have to do all the work yourself. I'd rather have my primaries sit there and help me navigate getting out of the hospital and doing that work versus somebody I have no relationship with. And so that definitely I felt like could be worked on, and sounds like I'm not the only one that feels that way.
Our fourth question, then we have Tell Me Something Good. What was the biggest challenge about going home? Was there any challenge that was unexpected? Did you feel prepared for discharge?
Hey, okay. Let's be honest. You're leaving the NICU. You don't have a discharge. You have multiple discharges. The first one, and probably the hardest one, is being a NICU parent, is the mom being discharged from the mom baby ward. 193 steps is what it was from our room down the hallway, past the nursery, through the doors to get out of mom baby ward. Why we were in mom baby ward at the back corner, I don't know. Why it seemed to be the turnaround point for every other mother with their bouncing bundle of joy, I don't know. The staff walking in and handing us not one, because we had twins, so you get double of everything. You get 2 take-home bags that say congratulations on your new baby, with newborn-sized diapers, some wipes, some butt cream, a few other things, baby photos. We got those, and trying to, again, manage everything going on. Yelling at the person handing you the bags does no good to anybody. They come over, oh, You're ready to go. You got your bags. Okay, let's get you down to your car. Oh, your little ones must be waiting in your car for you. Oh, it just must be so much fun to go home and cuddle them. I see the one reaction. Yeah. Okay. Yep. Nope. We're going to stop at the NICU on our way out. Entire way out. All it is a spreadsheet and a number. Yep. This person got checked out today. Yep. Oh, yep. Let me get you down to the car here. Oh, it must be so much fun. Are the grandparents down there waiting for you with the little ones? Yep. Walking right on by. Oh, look at all the other cute little bundles of joy. Out the door. We're going to stop at the NICU. We're going to spend time with our little ones before we go home. Oh, well, yep. Let me get you to the elevator. We'll get you right outside to see your little ones. Physically having to stand in front of my wife in the wheelchair and tell her she needed to stop and listen. She needed to turn around and take us back to the NICU because that's where our children were. That was where we needed to go. Not downstairs into an empty parking lot because the car wasn't at the curbside with 2 kids in it, but back to the NICU because that's where our journey had taken us. That's where our roller coaster was. That evening when we finally got home from the NICU, those 2 bags, doped up on drugs, C-section, pain, whole 9 yards. Both those bags got shredded. My wife made it through shredding one of the diapers before I took everything else away and cleaned up the mess and did that. But the damage that bag did was immense. Handing that bag out when they leave the NICU, when the parents are going home, would be a better solution. The discharge from the NICU, our son came home a full week ahead of our daughter. In March, during flu season, hospitals on lockdown because of the flu bug, not prior to COVID. We're told, yep, you can take him home, but you can't bring him back in. Okay, so do I take the dogs out of the kennel and put the baby in and leave the baby at home in the kennel? They worked with us at the time, skirted protocols, whatever we needed to do to bring him in. He stayed in the carrier with the blanket over him on the floor in the corner. The discharge from my daughter, complete opposite of leaving the first time. Came in, Nicole couldn't say more than 2 words to anybody. I bought enough cupcakes to probably supply half the hospital with cupcakes to celebrate finally we were taking them both home. Nothing from the hospital. The staff of the NICU celebrated with us. The staff of the NICU celebrated every accomplishment. They celebrated Valentine's Day. The staff did. The staff brought in cupcakes, cookies for the parents, for the kids. The hospital, as it was mentioned earlier, somewhere in those budgets, you can find it to send up a brownie, which I know is on most of your menus, or even a cookie that says with a candle that the NICU can stuff in it and go, here's a blue candle for the boys, green, pink for the girls. And here you go. You can have your candle. You can have your cookie. You don't have to light the candle. You don't want to set off fire alarms. But a simple act to say, yes, you made it. Yes, your roller coaster is going in a different direction. You're going home. But it's still that discharge. It's still the joy that should be celebrated there, just the same as the joy that should be celebrated when you're leaving mom baby with a bouncing bundle of joy. You need to do that for when they leave the NICU.
Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, so one of the biggest challenges of going home and just kind of commenting on their comment over there is just non-NICU nurses taking care of the baby. I think there should be like a rule, and I'm a medical provider, that it should not be non-NICU nurses, non-trained, because they're still NICU babies. They still have issues. And I don't know if reports not being given or what, but I had a traveler that caused an issue who basically said she didn't know what she was doing. Told me straight out. And I also had a L&D nurse um, gave my baby thin liquids right before I got there. And there's a big sign that says no thin liquids. And she caused a major Brady desat, and they had to come over and give her this. Was like, we're supposed to go home the next day. So they're in rounds, and she's like, oh yeah, she desatted Brady down to 30s. And then another nurse was like, well, it was really bad. And I just showed up. Nobody called me, nothing. And I lived 10 minutes away. I said, if something, call me. And I'm really glad I was there in rounds, because I talked to the nurse right before and I said, what did you do? Because she was fine. What did you do right before this happened? And she's like, well, I just gave her medicine. And I said, did you put it through the NG? Well, she didn't have an NG. And I said, you just gave her AR thickened formula. You see the sign, it says no thin liquids. You caused this. And she wasn't going to tell them in rounds. So I told them in rounds, and the doctor, they were like, okay, well, this is why this happened. It wasn't like, oh, now we have to reset the timer. So if I hadn't been there, then who knows? We would have been reset, and that nurse wouldn't have fessed up, and she shouldn't have been taking care of my baby. So, and it was significant enough, you know, I could have complained or something, but I have licenses. I know I don't, you know, I don't want to get complaints against me. I was just like having severe anxiety after that my baby's going to have brain damage caused by this nurse, and I'm going to go home, and we made it this far, 92 days, and then she caused brain damage. So it really needs to be NICU nurses. They need to be trained, and it's not, oh, she's just a feeder grower, you know, don't worry about it. So like real harm and stress and anxiety came out of those situations. So that was a going home that we almost didn't get to go home, or major harm could have happened. Does that work? Okay. Yeah. And then also they kept threatening a G tube at 40 weeks because she wasn't perfect and doing everything perfect, and they wanted to get rid of us. At least that's how I felt. And it was just like, okay, all the other babies are able to do this at 37 weeks and yours isn't. So you need to like mentally have this. And I was like, she doesn't need a G tube. I'm not going to have her have 2 surgeries just because you want her to rush her out of here. So there was a lot of advocating and stress on that. And I had 2 speech therapists that advocated. One drove across town like an hour before her shift, and she has little kids too, and got a special bottle with a special nipple that we could try. They advocated for her to get a swallow test, which we did, and we found out why she was starting to have issues, because she has a swallowing issue, but it wasn't severe enough to need a G tube. And she just needed to be on that AR formula, which we tried everything to do to not have to do that, obviously. And as you can see, we're now 100% breastfeeding. So that's a miracle in itself as well, coming home on 100% formula. And then that was what I was going to say. That also with feeling prepared for discharge. Yeah, so I had a freezer full of breast milk. I've been pumping for 3 months, and then I'm sent home on formula and a formula shortage, and there's no formula in the stores. And I'm single with a baby on oxygen. So yeah, that's a challenge. Thankfully, because she got on the Medicaid, she got WIC, and they were able to order me special formula. And I didn't, because I kept calling them and said, I can't find it. What am I supposed to do? Her PCP gave us a few samples. So that's definitely a challenge. That's, you know, I think not normal. It's like COVID and formula shortage. Like, this is not always normal stuff, but I don't know, maybe like making sure people are going to be able to feed their baby when they leave. Like, how are you going to do this? Like maybe ordering some for us or something like that. Because a lot of the they told me only 25% can breastfeed. So that's saying 75% are not able to and need to go home on formula. And if it's a shortage, it's still a shortage. Like, just how are you going to feed your baby? And that's it for that question. Sorry.
Thank you so much for sharing. I have two more.
Sorry. No, you're good.
Good.
The biggest challenge for us going home was, well, for one, we lived 11 hours from home. And our daughter, they found out with a swallow study, she was aspirating on just a droplet of milk. So we had to have the G-tube put in. And the nurses were like, oh, well, she's probably going to discharge in a few days. And we were like, yeah, right. We've been here for, how long? She's not going to go home yet. She's still not ready at all. So that was really challenging. We had to learn how to do a G-tube, which, like, I'm an occupational therapist, so I'm a medical professional, but at the same time, like, a G-tube is not something that you just know how to do. So the stress of that was terrible. She would have like Brady's if she wasn't like sitting upright due to reflux. So the whole thing was just really stressful. And the night before we were supposed to go home, of course, she had a Brady. We had to pack up the Ronald McDonald house we've been living in for 4 months, had our cars all packed. We were at the hospital the night before around 8 o'clock at night, and she has a Brady. So then that night we're like, is she going home tomorrow? Like, I don't really know. No one's really given us any direction. But the next morning, like, rounds were of course late because it was a Saturday. So it was like 10 a.m. They finally come around and we decide it'll be okay to go home because she had a bunch of shots and things like that. But just going home in a car 11 hours away, having to do a G-tube feed every 3 hours, having to hold her up for 30 minutes during the feed in the car in the winter. It ended up taking us like 14 hours to get home. We couldn't like see when we were hooking her up to her G-tube. It was just very stressful. And when you are transferring care that far away of states, you're going home. We lived in a tiny town of like 2,000. So our local hospital, like, they don't know how to care for her. They don't even know how to put a G-tube in. Like, so it was just, that was really challenging going back to our home state, not really having the support of anyone that has been caring for our daughter, let alone they probably haven't really dealt with any preemie babies at the hospital we had to go to. It was really difficult for us and a huge barrier. Along the lines of like setting up her DME. She was on oxygen and the G-tube. So we had to like call the DME companies the next morning just to make sure we have oxygen, we have all of her G-tube formula, that's all the supplies. It's just something that you're not trained in. And like, yeah, they did training at the hospital, but like it was for a day. And then we were just like expected to know what to do. And so it was just not really realistic. And we kind of felt like they thought that we like wanted to go home, which of course we did. But like at the same time, we're going home with a child with special needs. And you need a little more time than 2 days to do a car ride and to be able to care for this child properly when they know very well that we're not going to go home with any support. So that was challenging for us. And as far as being prepared for discharge, I felt like it was kind of sprung on us, but I really don't think you ever will feel prepared to discharge from the hospital. Your kid is hooked up to monitors for, they were 150, we were 110 days. You're totally dependent on that. Like when you discharge from the hospital on your first car ride home, 11 hours out of the hospital, you don't feel prepared because you don't have anything to tell you, oh, are they desatting? Are they having a Brady? Like, we don't know. We can't see her face because it's dark out. So no, but I don't think you would ever feel prepared to leave the NICU. The NICU is hard, but for us anyways, after the NICU has been another challenge. So.
Go ahead, Ladina.
I actually don't really remember the immediate in the hospital leading up. They had some stuff on the board, and just like everybody else, as long as she's breathing fine for a certain amount of time and her weight and car seat check and all of that. The biggest challenges for me were like right after discharge. Well, plus 3 years. So a couple of things, like I wasn't prepared for just any of the anxiety, PTSD stuff that I didn't even really recognize or acknowledge or even know for 3 years, which was, I'm telling you, big deal. So there's that piece that really I've never even heard talked about at all for moms going home that should be. The other big challenge, and I don't even know the solution to this because it's not really the hospital or nurses or doctors or anybody's responsibility, but we were a military family. So that means we're required to see a doctor on base in Cheyenne at the clinic there. That was terrible. They don't know how to work with premature babies at all. I was explaining as non-medical, barely knowing, barely understanding, barely functioning straight. I was explaining to them like, no, she's supposed to be behind a little bit. And as I was saying before, when they said, oh, we don't know if she'll walk till she does, there's already that terrifying piece. But then the doctor's saying, oh my gosh, this is so scary. Something might be really wrong. And it was literally just because of her premature age. And I constantly just have to explain that to them. She had a lot of issues. She was hospitalized. Well, not a lot of issues. Her oxygen kept dropping, and the base would not refer us off base. So we could not see a doctor. We could not see a pediatrician at all, like ever. I went way up the chain. I had to get letters from the NICU doctors from the hospital that we were at, put together so much stuff and present it to them. They would not give us a referral off base, so she couldn't see a pediatrician. So what that meant was, at least in Cheyenne, you cannot be seen same day on the base. So I could tell her breathing, she's sucking in right here and on her ribs and all the things you look for. I could tell that she needed to see a doctor. You cannot get in same day. So she ended up being hospitalized until she was 3. She hasn't been hospitalized since then yet. So many times, and every single time, probably like 12 times, I don't even know. All because her oxygen was low. And every single time she needed a nebulizer treatment and steroid. If we could have been seen by the doctor when I called 95 times, we literally wouldn't have had to go to the hospital, probably any of those times. Like she needed a nebulizer, which then, by the way, I fought big time and got my own and just treated her myself and pretended like I was a doctor, which kept her out of the hospital. So yeah, I don't know how you connect the dots there, but when you're military, there's definitely some dots that I don't even know how to fix it. But till I threw a huge enough fit and got my own equipment and treated her myself, which she was 3 years old. And they kept saying, well, we think she has asthma, but can't test until she's 5. They can't do tests until she's 5. And I'm like, she's been to the hospital 50 times. Every time I'm here, you ask me if she has asthma, but you won't treat her for asthma. So I said, I want an inhaler. I want a nebulizer treatment. Like, I don't know if I'm supposed to do that. And they did it. And she has not been to the hospital one time since. Yay.
We're going to veer off course a little bit and let Q&A happen now because we're almost to the end of our time. So I don't know who is manning the chat, but are there questions there? Otherwise, if you have questions here in the room, thank you to all of you for the vulnerability it takes to share your story. Honest about where you're at and where you were at. It takes a lot. Thank you so much. I'll start. Yeah.
I work as a physical therapist in the NICU, and I recognize a couple of you. It's really a privilege to have known you, and really a privilege to be here today. And I just can't tell you, I can learn so much from the books and from other people in the hospital, but I had to choose one thing to do today because I'm working, and I chose this, and I'm so grateful. And I will just work so hard for the babies that are over there, and you all being so honest and so vulnerable and so helpful to all of us. But to me in particular, I'm just going to be thinking about you and with such gratitude for ever and ever. And I'm sorry, so sorry for the things that have been hard. And I really heard some things that I think even me, a physical therapist in the NICU, which is not the life-saving service, and I think I can make a difference for people with what you shared. And so I really thank you so very much. All of you, thanks.
I do want to echo what Graham said. Graham, while, you may not have been involved in the acute phase of things, but I kept hearing over and over again that the concerns that you all raised, or perhaps the frustrations that you experienced, were not necessarily those early weeks when I had lots of doctors nearby, lots of respiratory therapists. It was closer to discharge. It was in the quote unquote stable feeder grower weeks, right? That's such important information for us to hear, because we think about it in the converse, right? When we sign out to each other, it's talk about babies on the ventilator who need, blood pressure support, etc. I don't think we spend enough time to think about care consistency, feeding consistency, therapy consistency in those last few weeks to months in the NICU. I think those that have been practicing for some time feel that and see it. I certainly round on the level 2s, where that's really the priority. But I think when you have a baby in that feeder grower stage in a level 3 or 4 NICU, it's not easy. And I just heard it repeatedly through today, and it was just such important information. The question that I do have is around primary nursing. I think we've known for some time it's very important. Both nurses and families know that it's important, critical to infant care and family well-being, but there is a shortage, right? So we have sicker babies, sicker moms right now. Our units are full. We can't provide primary nurses for all the babies. And I think we're looking for creative solutions. And I just wonder what you all think of that. What would be the next best thing to having primary nursing? Can we think about better ways than what we're doing it now? Clearly having non-NICU trained nurses, who've never fed a preterm baby, et cetera, is wrong. But, if we can't guarantee primary nursing, because this is sort of the reality that we live in, what's the next best alternative?
Yeah.
So the one thing that because Harper was in there for so long, we got to know multiple nurses. So, and where she was, there was a pod. So there were, what are there, eight pods in the area we were. So I think that battling that, there's still familiarity with nurses that are all working in that same pod. I think the problem that we had was at the end, we were seeing nurses we'd never seen before. So we would see nurses that were in our pod working with other children, but they weren't working with us. So we wound up with nurses that we had never seen before. So maybe a solution there is familiarity. If you've got 2 or 3, 4 nurses that are in that pod, that is a nurse that you could continue to see, or one of those nurses, because they're familiar with what's going on. I mean, I understand that. I mean, everybody's battling staffing issues. So we do understand that aspect of it, but there was a point with Harper that she was bradying, she was struggling at one point in time. This was when she was at her worst. And the nurse, it was a shift change, and the nurse came on, and she was the look on that nurse's face to see Harper struggling, and then of course we are freaking out because she's really bad, and this nurse had no history. She had nothing on Harper, and so that was an overwhelming experience for everybody in that situation, including the nurse. So to me, it just seems like familiarity with however that might solve some of that.
Yeah, I want to touch on that a little bit because I think we understand staffing issues, and obviously there is familiarity with a lot of the nurses while you're there. So, and I get there are more experienced nurses. You know, we were lucky our RNs had been there for a very long time. So obviously, yes, when there's a very sick baby, they need that experience with that baby. The frustration was, yes, getting a nurse. We've been there 150 plus, days, and we're getting a nurse we've never had. That there's enough nurses that we had. I mean, I got to the point I was a mama bear. I wrote a list, and I was like, these are the nurses that I want for my kid, and these are the nurses that I don't want for my kid, because we had experiences that were not so great. But it's like, if I can't have my primary nurse, then give me these nurses. Because like you said, we were in the pods, so we knew who the nurses were. They knew who we were because we'd been there. So we have the familiarity. But when you're there for 4 months and you're getting a nurse you've never had, I just don't think there's a way around that portion of it. And give us a nurse that we've had. Again, we're feeder growers. So it's like, oh, we'll just give them whoever. It's her first week. We'll go ahead and give her this baby. Yes, I understand everybody needs to do their turn, but now you're hearing how that affects parents in the NICU, and it is difficult. So I think just having just a familiarity, even if it's not your primary, it's somebody that's familiar. But just to backtrack a little bit, and I just wanted to make this comment. When we first got into the NICU, primary nursing was not explained to us to begin with. And I think that needs to be explained on day one, how it works and why it's there. We kind of just figured it out. And honestly, one nurse was like, oh, I want to be your primary. And we were like, what does that mean? Then we knew what it was, but we had already been there, I think 1 or 2 weeks before we even knew what primary nurses were. So there's a lack of, I feel like there needs to be a handbook, NICU handbook, to a parent being like, these are the things you need to do when you first go, because we kind of are just dumped in there. And then it's just an expectation of this is how it goes. And we have no idea. So you have to remember, we're, as moms, recovering a traumatic birth experience. We're going through just postpartum, everything. And then on top of it, oh, by the way, so that it needs to be explained.
Does, because they say primary nurse in the NICU books, like in the preemie books. But I was like, wait, primary nurse, we didn't get one. Where do we get one? But we had one, but it was just like, we didn't really know. Yeah.
For us too, sorry, I just want to add on something. I thought it was kind of strange, like when nurses would just sign up to be your primary nurse and they wouldn't ask you if you wanted them to be your primary nurse. I just feel it should be like a two-way street between nurse and the family, just because like maybe the family's not vibing the nurse, So I think it should be a two-way road for decisions, especially when they are caring for your child. I mean, when you're not there, they're their parents. So I think you should be able to choose who is caring for your child primarily.
Okay, I'll jump in. Sorry, I didn't know who you're pointing at. I'm going to just hop in because I have to leave. I just wanted to ask all of you, well, first I want to say thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your stories. I agree, this is the most powerful part of the day, and I'm so glad that I got to listen and learn from you guys. My question is, did any of you have any peer support groups while you were in the hospital do you think that is something that would be beneficial? That has been my experience. I also had a baby in the NICU, and peer support groups were amazing because I felt like everyone around us who loved us and cared about us, like, did the best that they could, but no one understood like another parent. So I guess I'm just curious if any of you have had that experience or what your thoughts are.
I did not have that experience, and I didn't know anybody who had a preemie baby. Didn't have any support really. And also had gone home, and they said, you know, she can't be around anybody for months and months and months, or she could die if she gets a cold. So I'm like super isolated. But no, I had no peer support. Yes, that would have been really, really good. But I did want to say that the NICU that I was at, there was posters all around. I said this on our Zoom call and I started crying because I never said this out loud. So there were posters all around of kids that, you know, however old they were, that had been NICU babies. And that was like my peer support. That gave me the most hope of anything in my entire NICU stay, because I could see all the super scary stuff that they tell you every day, that there was hope.
The support groups that they had at the hospital I went into was hey, the support group meets at 11 o'clock just outside the cafeteria. Go on down, grab a cup of coffee, hang out, you can chat. Yeah, no. I'm going to be upstairs. I'm going to be with my kid. Is there a conference call? Can I call in? Well, it's a conference call. Why would we do that? Okay, then I'm not going to have that. Conversely, after our NICU stay, we've provided support one-on-one through acquaintances because we shared our story with friends, coworkers. One of the volunteers came very dear to us. And it's been that, hey, my friend's brother is about to have a preemie. Would you mind if I connected you guys together? And that's where the peer support, I believe, can come in, is where it's that, yeah, hey, yep, you're in for a hell of a ride. You know what? Message me at 2 a.m. Your phone number's on bypass. You'll wake me up. If you need somebody to just scream at, don't do the King Supers person. Call me. But yeah, peer support would be a huge benefit, especially for the dads. There's a lot available for the moms being in the NICU more often. But the dads don't always have that ability to step away for that hour.
Okay, so this is a related question. So you just answered, you know, about peer support specifically, but there's a question in the chat about what would ideal mental health supports look like in the NICU for parents? So maybe it's not peer support, but do you have an idea of what would have been better than peer support? Or equally good
like
as
she's
peer
looking at
support?
me because I had anxiety and all the problems.
They at my hospital, I had already had therapy, like, because I was there for a month. And they came in, I can tell you, they kept sending one lady in, or she kept coming in, and it's open pods. And so she's just like, how are you doing? How are you? I'm just like, I'm good. I'm not gonna talk to her in this open space, and I'm a loud talker, so everybody can hear me. So that wasn't helpful. And then I kept saying, like, well, she's charging me. So like it was going on my bill. So I was like, the last time I said, you know, she set me up with this other therapist I could do virtual at home. And that was very, very beneficial. I still see her. And honestly, I don't know how I would survive everything without her. And they also set us up, that therapist set me up with like a group therapy of NICU moms. And that was pretty beneficial too. I think the they were both beneficial.
That would have been great. I did not have any of those options. I would say, you know, I honestly, by the time I got diagnosed with some of the stuff, I went into the doctor and I'm like, look, I am clinically depressed. Like, that's where I'm at. I am this, like, I have figured this out. So if somebody else could have maybe come in, the therapy thing, that's great. Even if it's virtual or something after, that would have been super awesome. But to have somebody who could have maybe caught that before I did 3 years later, yeah, some kind of a counselor would be awesome.
That should be really offered to every single person. And I just want to say, no matter how well put together any of us look, or being a medical professional, I cried most days coming and going from the hospital, and then I would straighten myself up. I think just, you know, you're in the hospital, you guys are doing your job. Every day we go home without a baby. We don't know if we're bringing a baby home. And I think you just need to assume we aren't coping well. She's my NICU neighbor, and I was just like, oh, she's always such a good attitude. It kind of irritated me because I did not feel like I was coping well. And I'm like,
really quiet, tired.
I was like, I should be coping well. I'm educated. I've worked in the NICU. Like, what's wrong with me? And here she is smiling and taking everything. She's just like, acts like it's all okay. And I was just like, man, how does she like coping so well? So I just think that support should be offered from day one, from the beginning, to every single person, and not assume just because they're smiling and acting like everything's okay that it is, because it's probably not. And as soon as they leave, they're probably crying on the way to the elevator.
Yeah, I echo that. That was actually as soon as I left, and I have it in my notes like 3 times, in-house counseling for parents. Like, they're always like, self-care, self-care, self-care. And it's like, I don't give an F about self-care right now. Like, I'm with my baby. I want to stay with my baby. But if I had somebody to talk to in the NICU, not to, I have to walk to another building, I have to drive somewhere else, because we all know hospital parking sucks. I want somebody in a room in the NICU that I can sign up and talk to every single week. I mean, postpartum is common as it is, but on top of that, now we have PTSD because of our traumatic births, and we aren't able to hold our babies, be with our babies, do anything with our babies. And so in-house counseling is, I think, top priority for moms and dads.
Have a job anytime soon. We're at time. We're over time. If you have questions, if you are okay with this, Susan, they can email them and we'll send them out to the group so that you can get some responses. I'm sorry we can't get to everybody.
Yes, and while the parent panel is concluding, I want to make sure that, Sahra, you still have time to go through to share your experience of how you went from NICU parent to advocate, and I now call her an activist for families who've experienced prolonged NICU hospitalization. So I want to give the floor to Sahra for the last few minutes before we conclude.
Thank you all so much again. Let's give them a round of applause.
You need to leave. It's okay. You can totally leave. If you want to stay, that's great too. Y'all know I'm Sahra Cahoon, and we're gonna skip. I built in stretch and breathe because I think we've all been sitting, but you can stretch and breathe while I talk because we're almost out of time. One of my favorite quotes: "What we call the beginning is often the end, and to make an end is to make a beginning. The end is where we start from." Whew. So my journey doesn't look much different than anyone else's NICU journey. Dr. Rosenberg did not consent to his photo being used in this presentation, just for the record. But it's a great photo of my husband and what it takes to hold a 24-weeker, which all of you know well. Our daughter Lily was born just across the street at the University of Colorado Hospital, and it was June 24th. She was born at 24 weeks, 5 days. I had been there for a while, and we didn't know what we didn't know. The world was a little bit different, and I could have never known what lay in front of us. We spent 3.5 months in the NICU, 111 days, I counted, where we had the best care I can imagine. We had incredible nurses, the best docs, and together we walked through a journey where our daughter on a regular basis tried to die. And on a regular basis, we saved her. She had every steroid in the book. But it was at a time where surfactant was new. There was lots of things we know now we didn't know then. We don't have a happily ever after story. So it's not the story that anyone really wants to hear. We brought Lily home on hospice. Actually, next week is the anniversary of that. And on November 7th, she died. And it's still hard. Love for Lily was born out of one question. We all talk about the NICU roller coaster, and we talk about it as though it's common, as though it's normal. But the thing is, it's not normal. Having a baby in the NICU where you have to talk about mortality is not normal parenting. That is not the normal parent experience. And so we bring this normalcy to things that are not normal. And I started to ask, where are the people? Where are the people while we were in the unit? Where are the people when we went home? And where are the people when she died? Because somehow it felt like we were the only people going through this. There were 46 other beds in the NICU. There's still 46. Well, I think actually now there's 54 beds. We won't go there. And it was very clear to me that there were other people who had walked this, right? Other people had been here, but where were they? There was no support at the U at the time. We didn't have March of Dimes. They had this pizza thing once a month, which I have celiac, I don't eat pizza, but I would go to this pizza thing and basically everyone would complain about their nurses. And then we would all go back to our bed spaces. And I was like, this is not helpful. And I'm telling you, they are the best team. I really do mean that from my core. I love them. I still invite them to family things. But when we began, it came from this. Where are the people? This was our very first group. All I knew is that I wanted to hug moms. That was it. I was like, I just want to hug moms and tell them that they're going to make it through this. And I really think that we need to feed them because as we have heard from everyone, there's no food and everyone is starving. And so my mom and my mother-in-law, we baked way more muffins than anyone needed. And we made breakfast burritos. And we showed up with coffee and baked goods and fruit and breakfast burritos. And not just the families, but the staff came and eat everything that you see. And we went, oh yeah, we need to feed everybody. So part of what we do at Live for Lily is bring home cooked meals. COVID has really messed this up for us, but we're hoping to get back to it. When we began, we did not have a name for the group. There was not a coach in the room. We didn't have pillars or even a formal mission to guide us. We really did have this idea of where are the people? And that if we just started to hug moms and dads, we would learn what was needed. I want to say there are a lot of great organizations now that did not exist 11 years ago, 10 years ago when this started. So I am speaking from a 10-year-old perspective. There are a lot of really great resources now that did not exist then. Although apparently, as we all can see, lots of people don't know about them. So we're going to get into some of what we do at Love for Lily, but mostly I'm going to talk about what it looks like to get involved. How do you go from a NICU parent, from a mama? I don't have any letters after my name. I don't have a medical degree. I have a degree in communications from CU. It's helpful sometimes. But what I did have was experience. And the other thing I had was a fire that no one should ever have to walk alone. I also want to take a little detour because when I was asked to give this presentation, the two words that were used were advocate and activist. And I was like, I am neither of those things. What do you think of when you think of activist? This is what else I think of. I was like, I am not these people. Definitely not as cool as Martin Luther King or as courageous, nor Malala, nor people who are getting tear gassed. I'm not sure that I'm an activist. And I'm definitely not sure how this fits into what we do. But I had just finished reading Karen Orland's book, The Lightmaker's Manifesto, which I think everyone should read for the record. And I felt seen. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the thing. And she defines activism. This is not how she defines activism. This is how the Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines activism: a doctrine or practice that emphasizes direct, vigorous action, especially in support or opposition of one side of a controversial issue. I don't think I do this. I even emailed Rebecca and was like, I don't think I do this. But the way that Karen Orland, you guys, there's little like things at the bottom that you can't see, sorry, defines activism through action. And she defines activism as as approaching something with an intentional mindset. It's about creating an It means taking responsibility to find answers to a problem, dedicating yourself to a cause greater than your own interests. Activism doesn't require a faith home or spiritual practice, but it can feel spiritual in nature. You get to know me, I'll tell you, I fall in love with all of the families. It's a real thing. I truly love them. I can't even imagine walking through the NICU doors and not sitting in that puddle. It's an honor to do it. So part of how you move from a NICU parent to what Karen Orland calls a light maker, which I feel much more in alignment with than activist, still working on the words. I wanted to say that this is not about the letters after your name. It's not about whether you're a nurse or a doctor. It's not about whether you know more. It's about wanting to change something. Nobody goes down this path because everything was perfect. You go down this path because you spent 152 days in the NICU, or because they handed you a bag when your babies weren't going home. It's a bit scary, if I'm honest, unless you go in totally blind. When you just leap, you're like, well, figured out on the way down. It's a little less scary. When you try to make a big plan, it can sometimes be like, how are we going to change this? How are we going to make a difference? A really big goal. And so my first thought is break it down. Pick one thing. You can't take on the NICU as a whole, but you can have a conversation at the University of Colorado, or you can have a conversation at Children's. You can have the opportunity to make change in a meaningful way without taking on the entire system. The system is broken. We all know it. Lots of people are working on it. Simon Sinek has this idea that if we start with why, it's kind of an old book, but one of my favorites. And he says in an organization or a goal, start with why. Why does this matter? What is the impact you really want to make? If the impact is, I want to hug moms and dads, that's a perfect impact. If the impact is, I want to change policy at a big level, you're going to go on a very different path. Both can be true. You can do both. But sometimes you have to pick one to start with. He calls this the golden circle. And the way that he works is from the inside out. So we start at why. Define your why. Understand why your affects the whole picture. And then stay focused. Don't get distracted by the squirrel, sparkly things, because they come. Stay focused. Just for what it's worth, I still have this problem. I'm like, I have a new program idea. Let's do this thing. And everyone's like, can we stay here? Gotta do what we do really well. The golden circle is a place to launch from. It doesn't mean that the how and the what aren't important. They're going to come. But starting with why is a really good place to begin. The next level is how. How are you going to start? How are you going to bring change? Are you wanting to start a group online or a podcast? Is it that you want to go to your NICU and just bring food? Those all make meaningful change. And then what? So the what is usually the easiest one where you're like, okay, I know why I'm going to do this. I know how I'm going to do it. And what am I going to do? It's the thing that makes the how and the why worth it. Dive in. Dive into your why, because it is going to sustain. If you had told me 10 years ago that I was also going to be the bookkeeper and I wasn't just going to run programming, but I was also going to do contracts with hospitals and I was going to get the 2 a.m. phone calls and also the trash has to go out and paperwork has to get filed and the state needs things, I would have been like, maybe. But then I remember why. I remember why this work is important and it keeps us going. I'm going to tell you about 2 other nonprofits that are wonderful. Toby Shower for Babies is Elizabeth and Josh Tolan, and they wanted to give back. They had a baby at Rocky Mountain Hospital for Children, and they create these beautiful baskets that have a fleece blanket in them and books for parents. And their why is that the baskets help fill what they would have liked to bring, but they didn't have time. They come from across multiple states as families, and there's no time in an emergency situation. So they may not have anything. Because their babies are so young in gestation, they don't want to leave. And these are items that comfort them and help with bonding. So reading a book to your baby makes you feel like a parent, right? Having a soft blanket makes a difference. We Cycle, which is an incredible partner for us at Love for Lily, and their founders are Sunny Hadron and Jamie Ritchie, and they both became moms and went, holy moly, it's expensive to be a mom. And they realized how blessed they were to not only have everything that they need, but also how quickly their babies grew out of it. And that they had so much life left in those items. And there had to be a way to spread that around and help support families who couldn't afford all of the things. That is how We Cycle began. And their why is still that today, that there's enough for all of us and we can share that wealth. Love is kind of a funny word to use here, but we use it a lot at Love for Lily for obvious reasons. But we use it as a verb. It's a practice. It's a choice. It's an active word. Love is a practice more than a feeling. It's an action. It's something that you don't just wait for. It's something that you choose. The verb, not a noun. And when we're walking into spaces as an advocate or a light maker, you have to walk into those spaces with love so that you are not part of the problem. Because walking into those spaces, we have to remember that we're all allies. The goals are the same. happy, healthy family going home. And we might do it differently, or we might not see eye to eye on the needs of families or the needs of a baby, but everybody's heart is in the right place. And walking into that space with love changes it for everybody. You guys read Alice in Wonderland? Begin at the beginning, the king said very gravely, and go on. So you come to the end and then stop. It's okay to choose to do something and then get to the end and say, we're done. I think sometimes people don't begin because they're afraid of where it will take them. I want to take breakfast to the NICU, but I don't want them to ask me to bring it all the time. I want to do a birthday celebration or a discharge celebration for my baby, but I don't want anyone to feel bad if I don't do it every year. Those little meaningful moments are beautiful when they happen, and it's okay when it's time to let them go. Sometimes we come to the end and we say, we still love you. And this part is over and we're going to move on to what's next. Something I like to ask when I'm talking to families, when they're kind of post-discharge, we have a connections group. So those are our 2-year out plus families. So what lights you up? What's the thing that makes a difference for you? If you love to bake, maybe baking is a thing that can make a difference, right? If you hate to bake, maybe don't choose cookies for the NICU as the thing that you want to do. But what question also keeps bubbling? Maybe it's around primary nursing. Maybe it's around education. Maybe it's around grief. What are the questions that you know could make a difference? So in my story, Love for Lily began as this group. It was a beautiful day. We also learned really quickly, just like pizza time, if you put a bunch of people in crisis in a room together, it falls apart. So a few months later, we brought in a life coach. Life coach was the least disliked option we gave parents on their survey. Therapists, you see when something is wrong. Social workers are scary. I don't necessarily believe these things. I'm just telling you what we heard. Life coach was like totally neutral. Nobody was really upset about this idea. We then proceeded to build pillars, and those pillars still stand today. We see people as whole, complete, and human. Fast forward 5 years, we had a group of moms coming together each week in post-NICU group, and their journeys all included a loss and a living child. The NICU is hard. It was hard for everyone. And this particular group of mamas was walking through a very different NICU than other moms. And those moms came together to create what is now Love Camden and Friends. It's our grief and loss programming. It took us 5 years to get there, right? Started with one hospital. We now serve 5 hospitals. It's okay to begin and not know where it's going to take you. I think 10 years ago, that goal of no one should have to walk this alone was the fire that I brought. But now we have this incredible community. Our dads speak sometimes louder than our mamas. They don't feel seen. Having dad's group is essential. Having another dad that they can talk to is not optional. We have to start making progress toward holding space as a family. We're working on it, right? We see it, but that doesn't mean we're perfect. And it doesn't mean you have to be perfect in order to start. You don't have to know exactly how it will begin. It's great to know why. I think that's the best place to begin. And what lights you up? What's the thing that you're passionate about? What's the thing that you want to bring change to? A different path is to find an organization that made a difference for you. You don't want to do your own thing. You don't have to bake cookies in the NICU. But find an organization that you loved or that you wish you would have had. And get involved. Volunteer with them. Ask questions. Tell them how they can do better. I will tell you, this is my favorite thing when we get feedback that says, hey, this was great, but this sucked. Because we know. Because we're doing our best and we don't always know. Let them know, hey, this is something I have this idea for. We have a mom right now who really wants to make pumpkin hats for all the babies. I'm like, awesome, let's make pumpkin hats. I don't do that, but I will help you get them to the babies, right? It's okay if you don't fit perfectly, but if it's an organization that made a difference to you, go ahead, make that leap of, I just want to know how we can get involved. I think it's really important to talk about the dark side of this, right? We don't get to this place of advocacy, activism, light making because everything was perfect. We don't get here necessarily because our journey felt exactly like we wanted it to. We get here because we go, something needs to be changed. And I think all of us in our lives, whether it's NICU specific or it's somewhere else, have that place where we're like, this can't stand. I don't like this thing. And your voice is powerful, but your action is more powerful. It's okay to pause. So some mamas tell me, been home for 2 days. I'm ready to volunteer. How can I help? I'm like, you get to take care of your baby. Dads call me while baby's still in the unit and say, hey, we want to help you guys. Now is not the right time. But I was thinking, and I love it. But I also say to all NICU parents, it's okay to pause. It's okay to take care of you. I'm the annoying person that talks about self-care all the time. It's not really easy in the NICU. But even when you go home, it's not easy. And sometimes pausing is part of that self-care. Sometimes giving yourself the moment to just take care of your little family before you dive into something else is okay. This is one of my favorite words. And when I stumbled upon this a couple of years ago, the beginning of COVID, and I was like, oh, this is what we do. So we can use activist, we can use light maker, you can use any word that you want. But marquee is a beautiful word that means to do something with soul, creativity, or love, to put something of yourself into your work. And this, for me, is the base of how you grow from a parent to an advocate or a light maker. I did it really fast. I'm still over time, but do you?
5 minutes over, but a question? I have a question. How do you finance yourself?
Teresa Joseph is sitting right there. She's our development director. We have partnerships with hospitals. We have contracts with hospitals. We also have grants that we apply for and receive funding through. And then we have corporate partnerships. And our biggest bucket is private donors. They are the families that we served, the grandparents of the families that we serve, and people who wish that they had services when they come to events, that write us into their tax credit at the end of the year, that really do support the work that we do in the expansion. Question.
Hey, Sahra. All right. Before we go, I just wanted to make you aware of a wonderful program that is sponsored by CPCQC, the Colorado Perinatal Care Quality Collaborative. Brace Gibson was here but had to leave earlier, but she is the manager coordinator for this program. So this program, Family Integration to Restore Trust, is a funded program. And really the goal is to have families with lived experience go from patients, parents to, I don't want to use the word activist, light maker, advocate, etc. And there are two phases to the program. The first is training. We recognize that families come from all different walks of life, so may require some training. So there's formal training that is delivered by a national organization called Mama's Voices. This is all virtual training. And so there are a number of topics that are addressed, including advocacy training, quality improvement education, leadership, etc. So there's training. And then after that, it's really integrating families into every aspect of our state's perinatal quality collaborative work. So that might be service in committees, such as even finance and audit programs and services. It may be being in leadership committees within Define, within our chosen, our SCN population. It might be serving on the board of directors like Emily Fawaz does. And what is really critical to this piece is that families are compensated for their time, that we have moved beyond families as volunteers, but really families are advocates, consultants, and a core member of this team. And therefore, through this training program, through the first program, families are compensated for their time, and additional resources like transportation, childcare, food, etc., are all provided so that we are truly having representation of the families in these leadership positions reflect and represent the families that we serve in the NICU. So please do share this with your hospitals, various organizations. The first cohort has gone through this training, and we're now recruiting for the second cohort. So now is the time to spread the word. For those of you who are not yet engaged in Define and are like, wow, this is the best thing ever, please do reach out to me, really anybody that's sitting in this room. And for hospitals in particular, what's involved is you say, yes, we're interested. We send you a data use agreement that allows your facility to put in de-identified data into our central system. We do a series of site visits to help train your hospitals, your Define team members. We learn from each other. You enter data. We generate quarterly data reports for you that's given to you. You can see how your unit is doing, and then we'll send you collaborative level reports so you see how you compare with our state as a whole. So please do let us know. And again, I just really I want to acknowledge our supporters from here, Department of Pediatrics, Division of Neonatology, CPCQC, Rebecca Guili, Elena Sayers, Blair Weichel, who runs all of our data. And as I tell folks all the time, we are a show on the road. So if there is a group, organization, or hospital that you think needs to hear about Define, just email us and we will be there. All right. So thank you so much for your time. I know we all have very limited bandwidth, and we really do appreciate you. And most importantly, thank you to our families.